Okay, let's open a word of prayer. Father, thank you for this day. We pray that you'll bless our time together, Lord. I pray that you'll, if possible, use what I have to say to warn people, let them know about what's going on, and to also find some comfort in the fact that this is what our Lord and the prophets had predicted a world would look like in the time of the end. We pray, Lord, that ultimately the message that we bring here would be comforting in its own way, warning in its own way, and also edifying in its own way. Bless us today in Jesus' name, amen. Well, today, I have to tell you, this has nothing to do with my own personal life. The convergence of looming catastrophes. My wife will tell you this, that in my own personal life, I don't like disruptions. I like everything that kind of goes smoothly. I'm sure you're not that way. So the other day, when we were in the Rockies driving on vacation, we hit a chuck hole early on a Sunday morning in the middle of nowhere, blew a tire, bent the rim. And so now we have a new rule at the house is no driving in remote mountain areas on Sunday morning when everything is closed, even in today's modern day and age. The other day I wanted to mow the lawn. We have some guy coming over to oversee it. And I don't like mowing the lawn, but it gets me some exercise. And so I go out and there's something wrong with the wheels on the lawnmower. So now I got to lift it up onto a bench and tear it apart. And it's just, takes an hour. I mean, I know what to do now, but it's just frustrating. Like somebody's really trying to get me, right? And it's working sometimes. But the convergence of looming catastrophes, and those are really not catastrophes. I mean, like if the worst thing in my life is, I've got to work on my lawnmower a little bit or put it in the car and take it to the shop, well, life's really not that bad. But we live in a world that everywhere you look today, I mean everywhere, I've been doing this for 20 some years in one fashion or another. It's really impossible to keep up at this point. It is so difficult. And I try to digest things that are going on in the world. So today will be, because of things we had to do around the house and some client work that I had to do, I'm pretty confident it'll be shorter than usual. Now, I always say that, but I think this week I can deliver, depending on what it is, because it's just spinning out of control. So we talk each week about the convergence of events, how these things everything seems to be getting closer together, speeding up. We live in a disrupted world. Here's some of the channels you can find us on. We're also working on developing an app, so we'll just give you some details on that when it's available. But it is a crazy, crazy world. So let me read a couple passages for you. Give me 1 second here. I thought I had this pulled up. Matthew chapter 24. Now, there are a lot of different views of Matthew 24. I focus on this passage in Matthew 24, verse 9. Then they shall deliver you up to be afflicted and shall kill you, and ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. That's for the sake of the name of Jesus. And so that ought to kind of give you a clue as to who they're talking about there. But I have people who disagree with it, okay? I don't want to get in an argument about that. But the disciples came to him with some questions. And in verse 4, Jesus said this. And Jesus answered and said unto them, Matthew chapter 24, take heed that no man deceive you. For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye not be troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in divers places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Then they shall deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. And then many shall be offended, and shall betray one another, and shall hate one another. And many false prophets shall rise, and shall deceive many. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many will wax cold. But he that shall endure to the end, the same shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations. And then shall the end come. When ye therefore see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let him which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house, neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. And verse 21, for then shall be great tribulation after this abomination of desolation, such as was not nor ever shall be since the beginning of the world to this time, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. Look, when John wrote the book of Revelation in Revelation chapter 6, he laid out some of the events that I think are tied to the beginning of sorrows that Jesus was talking about in Matthew chapter 24. Those would be the seal judgments, or the seal opening of the seals. And we know that there are 4 horses that ride forth in this time, and they bring with them all kinds of plagues and that type of thing. I think they are things that the seal opens. Say, for example, the second seal opens, and then that stuff builds. But while that stuff is building up, the third seal will open, the fourth seal will open. And so they may all be in this progressive stage, and then they really reach like a crescendo, like an orchestra would. That's my view. You know, I know people don't necessarily agree with that, and that's okay. But we live at this interesting time where there's a lot of stuff going on. So I'm going to share just a few things with you today and I really could go on and on and on, but so I'm going to do some physical signs, some political disruption, and some things about the Middle East, because there's a lot of things going on there that I think are pretty significant. And hopefully you'll be able to, I'm pretty sure I will fail at tying it all together, but I want to bring this up. So the article on the left, now this is this morning's Times of London in the UK, which is really one of my favorite newspapers. I like it because I find it to be largely factual. It is, and they do a good job, and then they have really cool graphics too, so I don't have to look too far. And so here's this infinite inferno. This is the island of this mountain or island in the Canary Islands, La Palma. It's part of Spain. It's off the coast of Africa. And it's been erupting. Now, about 10 or 15 years ago, if you look on YouTube, I'm sure you will find this. Just type in La Palma volcano collapse. And a person did a very well done graphic of, if this mountain collapsed, there's a fault line all the way along the mountain. And one of the theories is that at some point, it's possible that this mountain could collapse into the Atlantic. When it does that, it could set off a rather large tsunami. I've heard that tsunami could race across the Atlantic at anywhere from 10 to 100 feet high by the time it hits the east coast of the United States. So now imagine where you are along the coast, and if you're sort of within a couple miles of the coast and you're not above 100 feet, this could be very problematic. What happens if remember the tsunami that hit in Indonesia and Thailand, back in, I think it was Boxing Day 2004? 300,000 people died almost immediately. 250,000 in Indonesia, near where the epicenter of that earthquake was. Tens of thousands died in Thailand, at least 800 miles away, because of the tsunami. And that was not what you would term a huge tsunami when it came in. It might have been maybe 8 feet as it increased at shore. But this thing could really have significant impact. Now, I am not saying that this is one of the ones that causes every island to disappear in Revelation, what we hear and see and read in Revelation. But now this thing is erupting. People are talking about, they don't know when it's going to stop. It's been kind of quiet for a while, but now here we go. This could be a very big deal. This could cause a lot of devastation. And depending how the tsunami moves in the direction from anywhere from Florida to Maine, to the Canadian maritime provinces. It's not something to be trivialized with, and it's not something, the interesting thing in all of this is, despite the self-aggrandized view of themselves that many politicians have, they're not stopping it when it comes. It's true that in this, that God is really in control of everything. On the right side of the page, there is an article, and you see this cloud of locusts. This is in Africa. A plague of locusts blocks out the African sun, but the UN solution is too extreme. And this is kind of what I like about this newspaper, is because they'll have things in here. For example, there's an editorial by Jeremy Clarkson. He's a bit of a humorist, I think. And he says, I don't like what's going on. Everything's falling apart. But where do I go? I mean, Australia is so woke, it's unbearable. New Zealand might even be worse. The United States is a completely divided country. I think maybe I could go to Poland. And now, that's not a rundown of the Polish people, but, Poland or Hungary, despite what the mainstream media would tell you, actually look kind of attractive in this day and age. And some of the people I've read for years, like George Friedman, says Poland is a rising power in the world, which nobody ever really wants to talk about. Let's see. I think I talked about this last week with the what's going on in Canada. There's an update on this story that I talked about, that so Texas effectively banned abortions. Very creative way they did their bill. It's hard to explain, but they sort of took the enforcement out of government's hands, and now the pro-abortion crowd is wondering, like, well, who do we sue, and how do we bring the suit? So they brought a suit, and a judge put a stop to it. Then the Court of Appeal said, no, the law can go into effect. And they're just having a major meltdown on the pro-abortion side, to which I'm kind of enjoying watching this. This has not happened. Now, I want to also understand is that as these legislation things work their way through the courts, it's not going to solve the problem. Ultimately, it has to be put back to a political solution, and people will have a chance to vote on it and lobby for it. So the best solution I can hope for, absent the Lord just sending a massive revival in the United States on the issue of salvation, and that would lead to people having a different view of abortion, I don't think abortion is going to be banned in the United States. There's going to be some states that allow it. And maybe God will judge those states. See slide 1 that I used here today. God will act. God will deal with this eventually. Now I want to look to you, and I'm trying to remember the report that I got this from. There's a report out there that talked about age restrictions. This is a UN report. And the UN is a godless, globalist institution. It's what they allow to go on is just horrific. And it's pretty much, if you want to know like what God opposes, go read what the UN is doing. There's usually a correlation there. It's pretty easy analysis. That's just sort of a general rule of thumb. But they issued this report a while ago about exposing children to pornography. When the report came out on the left, the highlighted part said this: does the evidence warrant age restrictions? In other words, should pornography be restricted by age? Now that to us would seem to be, well, like, yeah, I mean, it really should be restricted a lot more than just age, but let's start with that. Protect the kids from this. And in the world's view, a lot of times, it doesn't matter that children are exposed to this. You need to understand, you got to protect your children. So it says here, does the evidence warrant age restrictions on pornography? Listen to what this paragraph said. As discussed above, the evidence is inconsistent and there is currently no universal agreement on the nature and extent of the harm caused to children by viewing content classified as pornography. Now, this is a UN document that's supposed to be talking about how do we help children. And the elites of the world think this way. There's no evidence to warrant restrictions. Now, wait a minute. Come on, are you kidding me? It should be fundamentally, basically evident to you. Now, I have low expectations of unsaved people. But there's children involved that need to be protected. And that's where people can't let this go. Now, so that hit the internet a month or so ago, and immediately that copy, that particular part of the document was taken down. But the beauty and problem of the internet is that things that are done online usually can be found at some point. So that's why you need to be very careful what you say or do, because people will find it. People can manipulate it. It's going to be increasingly difficult in the coming months and years as artificial intelligence and computing capability increases, as this stuff increases, it's going to be very difficult to determine what's real because of copyright restrictions on CBS, and they're one of the best at sort of enforcing it and flagging content that you use. They had a 60 Minutes report last Sunday. Go look it up on deep fakes. I don't know what this next election is going to be like. It's going to be bad enough. But people are able to manipulate things now. Sometimes And not just cut and splice things together, but to completely alter what you say. I mean, literally put words in your mouth. This is very troubling. And people are always they're scamming everybody. In a lot of cases, I was notified this week that somebody had taken my image from a public social media site, business-related site, and had set up an email account. And I got a call from people in the Middle East that sent thousands and thousands of dollars to someone for help on a legal issue. And they're calling me like, why aren't you returning our calls anymore? I'm like, I don't even know who you are. And this is something that's going to happen more and more. So just be careful. I saw this graphic earlier this week, was what we used to call Columbus Day, now called Indigenous Peoples Day. And it's always interesting that what people on the left do to make connections between Israel and the United States, because they seem to be the ones that everybody wants to attack more. Because they're countries with some semblance of freedom. Like I said, Australia, it's gone. New Zealand's gone. And we can argue about Israel and the United States. They're trending gone, I guess. But do you see what Susan Sarandon, the actress, did here about how native land dispossession took place? And do you see the parallels that she draws between Israel and the U.S.? Because the Palestinians are the indigenous people of Israel. Even Christian ministries say, well, Jesus was a Palestinian. And so on Indigenous Peoples Day, our vice president, trigger warning, here's what she had to say. I want you to listen to this. Now, understand the context. Just a week ago, she was at a class at George Mason University. A student said, well, Israel's an apartheid state and engaged in genocide. Now, there are a lot more Palestinian Arabs living in Israel today than there were 10 years, 20 years, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And it would seem to me that if genocide is taking place, they're not doing a very good job at it. Because they're not doing it. Yeah, people are getting killed. There's a conflict going on. It's vicious. There's a massive crime problem in the Palestinian governed areas, controlled areas. Among the Palestinians, there's like gang wars and stuff going on. It's bad. So here's our esteemed vice president talking about Indigenous Peoples Day.
It is an honor, of course, to be with you this week as we celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day, as we speak truth about our nation's history. Since 1934, every October, the United States has recognized the voyage of the European explorers who first landed on the shores of the Americas. But that is not the whole story. That has never been the whole story. Those explorers ushered in a wave of devastation for tribal nations, perpetrating violence, stealing land, and spreading disease. We must not shy away from this shameful past, and we must shed light on it and do everything we can to address the impact of the past on Native communities today.
So do you see how this narrative is being, they're changing history. This is what they used to say about the old Soviet Union. The future is clear. It's the past that keeps changing. Like some of those guys that used to be in power, now they're dug up and their bodies moved someplace else because they're no longer in favor, even though they were the leader and highly esteemed. And so there's this shuffle back and forth. all the time. And so this narrative that you understand is what's being done is they're building this narrative against people that they don't agree with. You are extremists. So with regard to the demonstration, insurrection at the Capitol in early January, they're now charging people that never went in the building. They're saying, well, you went within the perimeter of the gates, even though there's video showing the Capitol Police opening up the gates and fences. Well, and these people are being put in solitary confinement, but a guy who shoots up a school down in Texas, these people have been held without bail and solitary confinement for almost a year now, in some cases. But a kid who shoots up a school down in Texas gets out on bail that night. What is going on? This is another thing that they're doing, a roadmap to build a climate resilient economy from the White House, issued on Thursday. White House vows to beat climate change as systemic financial risk. They're changing everything, my friends, on the economy. They're tearing it down. They're the extremists. They're the ones that are attacking it. It's just crazy. Now, I'm not allowed to talk about things like this too much, but we have a great disruption and dislocation going on in our country from these mandates. For most employers right now, there is no mandate in place. It's not been released by the Department of Labor yet. That doesn't make any difference to the people in charge, whoever's running the show down there. This is affecting everything. We saw earlier this week the disruption of individuals protesting at Southwest about the mandate. I can show you statistic after statistic. I believe that 40% of state employees in California have not yet given information as to their vaccination status. Everybody this morning is all happy about Delta because Delta's not requiring it because they know the Department of Labor is going to issue the rule this week. This will destroy businesses. I don't think we grasp the impact that is going to happen when maybe hundreds of thousands of people lose their jobs in a week or two. There are about half the cops in Chicago that haven't complied yet. And there's a literal war going on, legal war going on between the mayor of Chicago and the police union, to the point where the police union has been enjoined by a judge in Chicago from even talking about it as to whether they disagree with the mayor's policy. Do you understand we live in a country called America where there used to be something called freedom of speech? It's crazy. There are thousands of nurses, doctors, first responders that are losing their jobs right now in the midst of a pandemic and a crime wave. 40% of TSA agents have not confirmed, the people that pat you down at the airport. Sometimes there was one time where I would call it really molested by a guy. And if you say anything, then they won't let you on your flight. But this guy, well, you need to report these people, but be that as it may, 40% of TSA agents have not indicated their vaccination status. And the people responded, I think TSA falls under the Department of Transportation and FAA, which was without a Secretary of Transportation to operate it for a while he was off on new parent leave. And I don't know, anybody replaced him or took over for the 2 months that he was gone. They're just tearing it all down. So there were hundreds and thousands of Southwest flights alone this week. This may spread to other airlines. Now, Delta came out and said, well, we're not going to require it. But they know that the Labor Department's going to come out in a week, this week probably, with regulations. And it's not like they're letting people make the decision on their own. If you decide not to do this, you have to be tested every 3 days, I believe at your expense, and you pay $200 a month extra for health insurance for each person in your family that's not got the thing for Charlie Vector 019er. Pilots are refusing. There's some organized resistance. It's just everything's falling apart. This has an impact on supply chain. Here's an article from the Federalist. Now everybody's upset, including this rhino here in the lower left, Liz Cheney, there with her political squeeze, Adam Schiff, talking about the thing that happened back in early January. But this week there was like a real assault, really real assault on the Department of the Interior by leftist climate activists. Did they all get arrested and put in jail and held without bond? No, the government explained it away. We're in an ideological war. Here's an article about Facebook. The attorney generals hailing from these states, Connecticut, California, Delaware, Illinois, Iowa, Maine, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Virginia, not only asked Facebook's founder to reveal its internal censorship methods for dealing with vaccine disinformation, but also asked the big tech mogul to commit to deplatforming certain users for promoting certain content and activists. So in other words, whatever you think that Facebook has done, now the government wants them to do more. But how does the First Amendment play into all of this? It's like we're without a rule of law. This is Adam Schiff, the number 2 guy at the FBI. He admitted to lying to Congress. Guess what? Big settlement this week. Oh, Andrew McCabe. Would I say Adam Schiff? Same reptilian family. Easy to mistake. But so Andrew McCabe, he's going to get his $200,000 a year pension. He's got a spot on CNN or MSNBC to make a lot of money doing commentary. And the government agreed to pay his law firm fees of like $550,000. Big law firm in DC. Within the contents of these spending bills, by the way, are these components where they're going to fund these community groups. And they'll say, well, we're cutting the $3.5 trillion bill to $1 trillion. So don't worry about it. But what's built into it is a mechanism so that you won't be able to cancel it out later. It's all a big sham and a lie, and they're destroying the US dollar. Very troubling. Let's see what this next slide is. Oh, France has an election coming up next year, and Giulio Miati of the Gatestone Institute says France to vote on the great replacement of Western civilization next year. As one Algerian novelist said that he quotes, "It's like humidity in a house. Initially, the threat is invisible." But what they're doing is, it says here in the lower paragraph, next year France will decide to try to save itself or continue to sink. Either way, it will unleash a tsunami that will not stop at its borders, and instead flood all of Western Europe. Folks, you need to understand, this world is changing day by day. It is, if you haven't seen it all yet, it's coming. Now I'm going to share with you some clips and spend a little bit of time on this today. Let's see. Well, I'll get to the Middle East here in a moment. So this week in Madrid, or last weekend in Madrid and early this week, was a conference called Transvision Future Summit 2021. And I've been trying to dig out the videos. I haven't seen all of them. Joe Allen, who works at the Pandemic War Room, Steve Bannon's Pandemic War Room, and I would recommend you follow him on Twitter. It's pretty easy to remember. Joe, J-O-E, Bot, B-O-T, XYZ, Joe Bot XYZ. And he writes on this, and I'll share some stuff from him before, but this comes out of this stuff called transhumanism. You need to understand that, as Patrick Wood, who was here a number of years ago, has written on technocracy, this is one of the major issues of our time in terms of the religious aspect of it. And Joe Allen and Patrick Wood are two of the few people who are even talking about it, even on the conservative side of things, as these people think they're going to build a technology god. It's a religion. It is the risk of being lambasted like they lambasted Steve Bannon the other day for calling it a cult, a techno cult. It is. These people are crazy. This is Genesis 11 stuff, Tower of Babel stuff again. This may be what it is that God intervenes. They're talking about the singularity where we all become one with this. And then here they're talking about humanity plus. I want you to understand the gravity of this. Here's a screenshot of their conference. I thought I had a conference promo. Well, hang on. I want to show you this conference promo. It may be in my slides. It's just that the first part of it's black, so I can't remember if I put it in or not. Look at this promo from this conference that they held in Madrid this week. Transvision 2021. Nanotechnology, the future of meat.
Delicious.
Humanity plus. Organ printing. Designing the future. Transvision Madrid. this is how you're going to live longer. In fact, if they have their vision, you'll live forever. And it'll be a virtual reality world in many respects. Paradise engineering. Go look up the right website, Transvision Madrid. One of the speakers was Ray Kurzweil, who started a thing called Singularity University that's funded by Google. He worked, I don't know if he still work for Google. You remember this from 10 years ago, at the time of the Arab Spring? This Time magazine cover, 2045, the year man becomes immortal. This is not, we're 10 years down the road, and they're trying to advance the time clock. They want 2030, not 2045. One of the speakers at this conference was this visionary, her thing is hashtag Market-T7 on Twitter, Nell Watson. She was a speaker. She said this on her Twitter page: some of us think that rapid scientific advances will make human immortality possible from 2045, the year in which death will be optional. And she has a coupon, C-U-P-O-N. I guess the technology quite hasn't caught up with misspelling in her world. Here's her slide from the conference, Designing the Future. Here's her Twitter page. Tech ethicist, researcher, reformer, AI faculty where? Singularity University. Chair, IEEE. Here's a slide from her presentation. It's not the clearest, but she even acknowledged that things are changing pretty rapidly. This is a quote, so the Facebook censors need to understand in YouTube and stuff. I'm only quoting this person. What she said at this conference: mandating human augmentation prior to 18 months ago would be indictable as a crime against humanity. Well, that's kind of interesting that she would say that. Listen to what she actually said, though, because she expressed some, I think, concerns about the problem. But, you know, we'll overcome the problem because we're pretty smart people. We're the elite. But here's a clip of her from the conference.
The global health crises are being used as an excuse for greater authoritarianism. And some of the new assumptions about how the world works, which have been made, could end up as a Trojan horse for some kind of social credit style monitoring systems. Because today it's immunity therapies, but in 10 or 15 years, it might be people who reject some kind of brain-computer interface.
Okay, so do you want me to just summarize for you? Now it's immunotherapy. That's what she calls the you-know-what. And she said tomorrow, and it's being used as a way to bring in a social credit system and control things through tyranny. And then she said, and today it's this thing that we're not supposed to talk about. Tomorrow it might be a human brain interface. So in other words, if you don't accept the implant, the Neuralink implant that's being pushed by the richest guy in the world now, worth over $200 billion, Elon Musk of Tesla, and he's now worth more than Bill Gates and Warren Buffett combined. Do you understand? This is, I did a run when Jeff Bezos was worth about $230 billion and was the richest person at the time. He could buy a $10 million property per day for, it was years and years that he could do that. Every day he could buy a $10 million property. I mean, if he made more money, he would still have $1 billion at the end of this. after many, it's crazy wealth. But understand that she should now, so I guess I need to give her the sticker this week for guest prophecy updater. Talked to some people about Bible prophecy recently. A couple people just yesterday saw one making a comment about it at a conference, and talked to another person. They're like, it's like the four horsemen. They're all mounted, and they're kind of, rustling around the corral, ready to ride out. You know how it kind of gets dusty when they're kind of bouncing around in the corral? I don't think that that's too far off. So here's some more about this. Madrid hosts futuristic event. In 30 years, we will be younger. One of the speakers did this: why transhumanism? And so they object to, well, you can't call this a cult. I mean, how dare you call this a cult? And here's another, excuse me, I have to put in another video here. Here's one of the guys speaking at the conference. And listen to what he says. And, well, we have to, you need to understand that this is, you people who think this is bad, you're a problem. You don't get along. You're not really technologically woke. Let's see here. Oh, here's another one. So there are two videos here from this conference. First one we'll sort of talk about, we're not a cult, we're just helping humanity. Here's what they said.
So it's time, I say, to promote the T word, transhumanism, and just to make sure that people understand it properly, that it's a philosophy not for the elite just, but for everyone. And we should emphasize the transhumanist values, openness. This is not closed-mindedness. It's not a cult. As Steve Bannon, the former advisor to President Trump, said in his podcast a couple of days ago, when he apparently said, there's a bunch of cult members meeting in Madrid to discuss transhumanism. Interesting. We are not like that. We want to emphasize our openness, our diversity, and our support for true liberty, true creativity, truly being alive, and that we must exert agency. We must steer technology, we must steer society so that it is truly for the best.
Oh, but if you don't go along with our concept of liberty, we'll force it on you, right? So here's another guy talking at the conference, and he'll use the example of the Amish, but then listen to who he praises.
Groups will disapprove of technology, will not want technology, like the Amish in the United Kingdom. The Amish left the United Kingdom, and then they went to the USA, even to some places in South America, and they don't want technology beyond the 18th century. And what was special about the 18th century? Nothing that I can think of, but I want you to think about a new view of the world, because China is really the Middle Kingdom. If you look at the characters of China, it has two characters. The first one means center. The second one means kingdom. China means the Middle Kingdom, the center of the world. And let me tell you, sadly, you are part of the last non-designed generation. All of you are here by mistake. You were not designed. In the future, we will be designed. We used to say at Singularity University that you need to think exponentially, because if you do not Uber yourself, you will be Kodak.
Okay. That's kind of interesting.
So
So this is has a creepiness factor. Just a little bit more about the business thing. Turkey's lira has fallen after a purge in the central bank. You need to keep your eyes on that. Inflation is getting in our heads and gaining oxygen, according to this article. Higher prices are already shifting American habits, posing threat to recovery. But it's okay. I mean, they mentioned a high-price rental car. When we were in Denver for 2 weeks, full-size car was $2,500 for 2 weeks. SUV, $4,850, $330 per day for a car. That's before your hotel. Maybe we need to go down to that RV lot and look around. I think I might have mentioned that first hour, but here is White House Chief of Staff approving of a tweet from an economist, Jason Furman. I think he might be at Harvard. Most of the economic problems we're facing, inflation, supply chains, are high-class problems. We wouldn't have them if the unemployment rate was still 10%. We would instead have a much worse problem, really. Peter Navarro, who was an advisor to President Trump, was on Hannity, and I want to play an extended clip. Peter's a very intelligent person. He has an article in the New York Post the other day called That 70s Show. Here's this clip of Hannity. It has an introduction to it and then a short clip.
Economists now fear a looming recession, according to Peter Navarro in the New York Post. Welcome back to 70s-style stagflation misery, thanks to Uncle Joe. Peter will join us in a moment. Add to this, Biden's vaccine mandates. Oh, when they hit, watch out. What impact is that going to have on the economy? And now causing Americans to, they're willing to get fired. It looks like half the police department in Chicago, they're not going to be working as of next week. And it's going to get worse. Thousands of our military personnel, nurses and first responders and healthcare professionals, you know, the people in the middle of the COVID shift show in March and April of 2020 that every day walked into a petri dish of COVID and were diving on COVID grenades to save fellow Americans' lives in the early months of this pandemic. Now we're going to fire them? I guess that's Joe Biden's way of saying what? Thank you? Because they don't agree with the mandate? Maybe they have a rare condition. Maybe they believe in natural immunity. I'm not here to debate the shot or not, but the reality is you're going to lose some of the best people that risk their lives to save fellow human beings, fellow Americans' lives. But I guess Joe doesn't know about that because he abandoned Americans in Afghanistan 13 days after he said he wouldn't. Half the Chicago police force might be forced to go very soon. We got hundreds of airline employees, they're facing termination. Thousands of teachers, thousands of U.S. servicemen and women have or will be fired in coming weeks. You have state employees, you've got federal employees, members of the military, employees at large, private corporations, all facing termination if they don't comply with the mandate. But Joe Biden refused to answer any questions about all of this. Here with reaction, author of In Trump Time, a journal of America's plague year, former trade and manufacturing policy assistant to President Trump, Peter Navarro. I'll be honest, Lawrence Summers is not somebody I thought I'd agree with a lot on policy, but he's dead on accurate, and this is going to get worse. And then we're now looking at supply chain issues all through 2022, inflation into 2023, and gas prices, unless he goes back to energy independence, we're all screwed.
Yeah, Sean, he's only half right. What I'm really worried about is the other part of the equation, the stag part, the recession part of the equation. We haven't had that since 1970. We got the identical conditions now we had then. Profligate fiscal policy, a Fed chairman printing money, and these exogenous cost-push inflationary shocks. I mean, there's so many things going wrong, but let's start with two that President Trump had right. First of all, we are the Saudi Arabia of natural gas and energy. And we've got gasoline, on fire right now, and natural gas prices are scorching. Now, that's not just energy that's going up. Food production is largely dependent on energy. Fertilizers are made out of natural gas, so we're going to get energy and food price shocks. Buy American, hire American. That were the two simple rules, Sean, of President Trump. And we warned for years that if you don't build it here, your supply chains won't be here, and when push comes to shove, you won't be able to get it. Now we got these ships stacked off of Long Beach, and we've got that kind of crisis. And on top of that, whether you believe in a universal vax policy or not, it is simply inflaming the distortions in the labor markets. You got Navy SEALs, firefighters, healthcare workers, teachers, cops. Everybody is saying, hey, if I've already had the virus, got antibodies, why do I need the jab? Again, regardless of your position, it's contributing to labor market distortions. Stagflation is the hardest problem, Sean, to solve in the world, and everything that Biden is doing touches the dirt. I mean, and you're absolutely right, Sean. The last thing we need to do right now is to pass the $3.5 trillion red ink New Deal and that fake $1 trillion infrastructure deal. It's just gonna be crazy. This can last a decade. I'm not worried just about Christmas. And by the way, Sean, what is the Department of Transportation Secretary going on a 2-month leave in the middle of a crisis like this? It's offensive to the American people. Nobody seems to be at home in the Biden White House, and Trump was the most accessible president in history.
Okay, so listen. Maybe it's not the Biden White House that's running the show. I mean, at what point do we really talk about this in a serious fashion? I have a few things I want to cover here. So, the vaccine, the shot. I'm going to play for you. You could draw your own conclusions. This is an actionable clip from the 2019 Golden Globes Hollywood Award show. This is kind of interesting. Watch this.
At this point of the show, the host would do something fun and spontaneous to show how we're all just ordinary people, like ordering pizza for everyone.
But since we already get food at the Globes, we thought we'd mix it up and try something new. So roll up your sleeves, Hollywood, because you're all getting flu shots! You know you wore a sleeveless gown for a reason.
Hey, shot, 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 shot. Excuse me, ma'am, you're definitely going to want to get Defoe. Great.
These nurses are all licensed professionals straight from the Rite Aid in Echo Park.
And look, if you're an anti-vaxxer, just put a napkin over your head and we'll skip you.
You're welcome, you guys.
This costs 50 grand, you guys. You're welcome.
Some of the biggest stars in Hollywood are getting ready.
Okay. And now we have this, here's a Loudoun County School Board member resigned amid recall attempt. I don't even remember if you saw, pretty sure I played the clip of the father who was getting arrested at a Loudoun County School Board meeting. After they declared an open assembly, a closed assembly, then everybody was charged with trespass. Why was the father there? He was there because his daughter had been sexually assaulted by somebody who claimed to be a guy in the gender neutral locker room or whatever. And guess what? This gal whose picture's up, she covered it up. She's gone. All of them ought to be gone. You know what they did? Because of you remember in fact, I saw an article about that shooting down in Florida a few years ago where the kid went in and killed a bunch of kids. He's pleading guilty now. He could get sentenced to death, which is fine. Do it. Just do it. And bring closure to it. But what part of that problem was, that was a troubled kid who had fallen through the cracks in the system because of a prior administration's messing around with the rules about whether school boards and school districts had to report that kind of thing to the police and involve the police in crimes. And it's still going on in Loudoun County, Virginia. Except now that administration's back in charge. Folks, I'm not burning down the house. They are. And the lawlessness that we see is just stunning. This is kind of a troubling article from the Economist. No, Financial Times this morning. China tests new space capability with hypersonic missile. They launched a hypersonic missile, went around the world. It missed its target by about 24 miles, but it came around the world at a speed, and they had 5 people from the intelligence community look at it, and they're all like, how did they do that? You understand, this puts at risk all of our ships. There's a new article, a new cover of Foreign Policy magazine talking about who rules the seas. That's no longer an easy answer. It's complicated. But here we are losing maybe hundreds of thousands of U.S. troops, and China is rattling its saber about Taiwan. You want to see a supply chain shortage? You have Taiwan where 92% of chips that are necessary for stuff like this are made. Here's an article from Bloomberg I didn't even have time to put in a slide. Cars get stuck at U.S. garages for weeks in spare parts shortage. The world supply chain woes are bearing down on U.S. auto garages. You know, where you get your car fixed. The challenge of finding spare parts as mundane as oil filters or carpeting has forced repair shops to hoard inventory, find workarounds, and plead with customers for patience until a shipment comes in. Typical delays of a day or two have stretched into weeks in some cases, shop owners say. It's a self-feeding loop. A global semiconductor shortage has cut the production of new vehicles, leading to a surge in demand and prices of used cars and forcing people to keep the old ones longer. In turn, these vehicles need repairs, which are now increasingly being dragged by supply chain snarls. Listen to this one. In the Seattle suburbs, one garage owner waited on parts for 60 to 90 days on 2 separate occasions while fixing pickup trucks. One of the parts, a crankshaft position sensor, I hate it when that goes out, used to take a half hour to get from the distribution center. The wait got so long that the customer was ready to give up on his Dodge Ram 1500. He went so far as to say, I'm going to tow it and buy another truck. But the problem got compounded when he found out he couldn't just go down and buy one because the new car dealer didn't have any. Listen, you need to prep. There's plenty of prep organizations out there that will help you through it. And that's not trusting the Lord. That's using the brains that God gave you to see the reality of the situation that we live in. It's kind of nasty out there. I think it's gonna get worse. So I'm trying to figure out how to. This is the Baptist part of the. Who started making these water bottles that are so thin that you pick them up to screw the lid off and you get baptized when you do it? I'm not complaining, mind you. This stuff doesn't bother me. I hear somebody in the back laughing. It's a familiar laugh. This ought to trouble us. Now, it's interesting, the Financial Times article on the right, British Conservative MPs stabbed to death, but they don't tell you who did it. The Times did, okay, 25-year-old Somalian. Now I think they're saying, I don't know if this one they're saying mental illness yet or not. There's a convert to a certain religion who took a bow and arrow to a bunch of people. I think he killed 5 in Norway, and they're saying, well, he's a recent convert, but it's mental illness. You know, that's how they always go. So this was what they call a surgery, where they get together and talk to their constituencies, members of parliament. This guy, by all estimates, was a great family man, family, kids, wife, good values, and somebody went in and stabbed him to death for a reason. Now the concern is, well, what about all of our members of parliament? Or should we be concerned about that? And the answer is, maybe you should. Again, this comes in the context of China really becoming very bellicose over what they're going to do with regard to Taiwan. Back to supply chain issues. I apologize that this is a little bit out of order, but here's what Captain Sam Brown said. We're now hearing that supply chain issues are going to last through 2022. This is not an issue that can be kicked down the road, yet 13 cabinet members from the United States government are being flown to Scotland to chat about climate change with the elite. The administration is broken. There's supply chains everywhere. Here's an article from the Times this morning that says that bed blocking crisis as jab deadline looms. So here's the problem. There are people in the hospital. They need to go to care facilities. They can't go home. But they're in the hospital taking up space, which means that people that need medical services can't get there and get services done because there's no beds. But they can't go to the care homes because, according to this article, if I recall correctly, Sajid Javid, the health secretary, has refused to pause a requirement for care home staff to be fully vaccinated by November 11th, despite claims that it will result in as many as 100,000 workers quitting the sector in the UK. In another place, another article I read this morning, 20 million people in the United States just retired and quit their jobs. Why? They don't want to mess around with this nonsense. You know, I'm glad I'm at the age that I am. And the elite, they think they can opine on everything. So, Captain Kirk finally got into space, sort of into space this week. 90 years old, oldest person ever. And what happened? Well, Prince William and Prince Charles, they had to tell me, your carbon footprint is too big. You know what? You got about 80 million square feet of homes. Your carbon footprint is too big. You hypocrite. I almost made reference to, when I see Prince Charles, my comment is, long live the Queen. Now I'm thinking this about Prince William. This is an editorial cartoon from this morning's Times of London. Enough royal lectures on the eco catastrophe. There are a couple articles I want you to read. You can go to CarolineGlick.com and you can listen to, she has a podcast each week. I would highly recommend, I'm going to put a clip in here in a moment. They had a big meeting this week about the Abraham Accords. Seth Fransman has an article about that in Jerusalem Post on Friday. I will continue to express my concerns about the prophetic implications of the Abraham Accords. There's a lot of back and forth in Israel, like is Iran near a bomb? Are they ready to go? Some people say they're ready to go. They've got everything. Yossi Cohen, the former head of the Mossad, who was in charge of the program to kind of slow them down, says, they're a long, long way away. And then the problem with this is it just all gets very confusing and nobody knows really what to do, because it's sort of like, you know, there's a theory that the churches of Revelation correspond to periods of church history. So the last period of church history before the Lord returns would be the era of Laodicea, which really means the church of everyone's opinions. Well, now it's the world of everyone's opinions on everything, and it's very confusing. you don't really know what to believe. It's hard to dig, and I try to dig out the truth. And I try not to present things to you that are not true. But so when I started this today, I called this the convergence of looming catastrophes. And so I just want to play this few-minute clip from Caroline Glick's podcast the other day. And I want you to just kind of listen to her. Now, it's going to be her partner talking for a while. They're talking about what's going on in Israel, and that, Melanie Phillips, by the way, has a great article on the two-state solution and what Abbas has said and what the Israeli government is doing, and they're just sort of kowtowing to this Palestinian issue again. And people like Caroline and her broadcast partner here are very, very concerned about it. So listen to what they have to say, and we'll close with this. I promise this is the end. But this is an interesting clip. Listen to what she says near the end of this clip, because I think it shows this different world that we live in right now. Here we go.
We don't have a lot of time. The United States has one more election, and then basically, if the Republicans aren't able to win back the country in 2022 and then in 2024, I don't know what's going to become of the United States. I mean, you have the Attorney General declaring war on parents and prosecuting a war against parents on behalf of cultural Marxism in classrooms. And here in Israel, we don't have a lot of time. These people really are endangering us. The things that they're doing, whether it's with the BDS groups and the campaigns against Israel to delegitimize their very right to exist, whether it's empowering the Arabs of Israel, who, you've said before, and I think you're right, we may end up, because of what they're doing, having to fight a civil war against Israeli Arab citizens who have now been empowered to believe that they can destroy Israel with no penalties.
We're probably not going to start such a war, but they may instigate it. Yeah.
Well, we've already had one campaign of Hamas that was joined by Israeli Arabs who burned Israeli cities and launched pogroms against Israeli Jews. And then, you have Iran. We don't have a lot of time. And when you look at the kind of destruction that the right intellectual base is causing to the country by giving legitimacy to this sort of thing, you really do have to wonder. So I have to say, I applaud you for being, rude on Twitter on this. And the problem is that you always put these things out and get attacked right in the middle of me attacking somebody else on something completely different. And I don't want to distract from the importance of what I'm saying by going to war against Makori Shon as well. But I will, don't worry. And I don't know, but we really, one of the things that one of our big challenges is to figure out how to win this. And it's very bad because the stakes couldn't be higher, and time is precious, and we don't have any to waste.
I think there'll be a rude awakening if with one of the looming catastrophes. I'm sad to say this. I don't subscribe to the Leninist idea that it's better to get worse first. Or no. It will get worse before it will get better, because we don't know that it will get better after it gets worse.
Well, we just have to keep fighting the fight and let God take care of the rest, I guess.
But my feeling is that we are, the way they are dismantling our most important foundations, it's something is going to give and something is going to collapse, and it's going and if that happens, they'll be washed away. We'll be left without like the Oslo paradigm, but we'll be left with someone, and we need someone like Netanyahu in order to start rebuilding.
So did you get the gist of this? We're running out of time. And there was one place, I don't think it was in the clip that I played, Caroline said, we're really at a time where only God can solve this. And I agree with that. We are at that time. So I don't want to depress you, but in some respects it's kind of exciting. But we need to get our hearts and everything prepared to meet the King and the Lord. And we need to be watchmen. So all of these things, supply chains, labor shortages, just crazy. The ports in Los Angeles, they're not getting truck drivers to go there because they're like, well, we don't want to go to California because in 2035, they're requiring all trucks to be electric. That's expensive. We don't have the money to do that. You understand? It's like all these little dominoes falling all at the same time. So listen, God's in control. This is what he said, what I said, but don't quote it back to me. What did you think the end times were going to look like? Just don't shove that back in my face, okay? That's not fair. So look, may the Lord be glorified in all of this. That's my prayer. Let's pray. Lord, pray that you will. Lord, keep us sober-minded, prepared, ready to give an answer for the faith that lies within us, ready to share the gospel with people in a really desperate time and to help people when they need it. And that in all of the things and everything that we do here at FBC and elsewhere, that ultimately the Lord be glorified in what we do. Bless us this week in Jesus' name. Amen.